Param Vijayate Sri Kṛṣṇa Sankirtanam. Total world victory of Hare Krishna. Here's my view this morning. I'm in a tiny house in Waihuru. We are en route to Auckland to see Vrajadam, Bhakti Chandrika and Kavi. My name is Sitapati Das, and this is Bhagavad Gita as it is, chapter 1, text 24. Sañjaya uvāca, evam ukto hṛṣīkeśo, guḍākeśena Bharata, senayor ubhayor madhye, sthāpayitvā rathottamam. Sañjaya uvāca, Sañjaya said, evam thus, ukto addressed, hṛṣīkeśaḥ, Lord Kṛṣṇa, Guḍākeśena by Arjuna, Bharata, O descendant of Bharata, senayor of the armies, ubhayor both, madhye in the midst, sthāpayitvā placing, ratha-uttamam the finest chariot. Translation: Sañjaya said, O descendant of Bharata, having thus been addressed by Arjuna, Lord Kṛṣṇa drew up the fine chariot in the midst of the armies of both parties. Purport by His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. In this verse, Arjuna is referred to as Guḍākeśa. Guḍākā means sleep. And one who conquers sleep is called Guḍākeśa. Sleep also means ignorance. I'm looking at my phone here. I have the Bhagavad Gita. Sleep also means ignorance. So Arjuna conquered both sleep and ignorance because of his friendship with Kṛṣṇa. As a great devotee of Kṛṣṇa, he could not forget Kṛṣṇa even for a moment, because that is the nature of a devotee. Either in waking or in sleep, a devotee of the Lord can never be free from thinking of Kṛṣṇa's name, form, qualities, and pastimes. Thus, a devotee of Kṛṣṇa can conquer both sleep and ignorance simply by thinking of Kṛṣṇa constantly. This is called Kṛṣṇa consciousness or samādhi. As Hṛṣīkeśa, or the director of the senses and mind of every living entity, Kṛṣṇa could understand Arjuna's purpose in placing the chariot in the midst of the armies. Thus he did so and spoke as follows. Purport ends. Sañjaya uvāca, evam ukto hṛṣīkeśo, guḍākeśena Bharata, senayor ubhayor madhye, sthāpayitvā rathottamam. Sañjaya said, O descendant of Bharata, having thus been addressed by Arjuna, Lord Kṛṣṇa drew up the fine chariot in the midst of the armies of both parties. Om jnana-timirandasya jnananjana shalakaya chakshur unmilitam yena tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha. Arjuna is on a battlefield. There are two sides on the battlefield. There are sides in life. It is unavoidable. The desire to avoid there being any sides in the world is misguided. You know, in this conversation, Arjuna is going to have a breakdown. He's going to be like, I don't want it to be this way, Kṛṣṇa. Why does it have to be like this, that there are these sides and I have to take a side? I don't want to. Why is Bhagavad Gita spoken? Why does this book exist? Why is it here? Because that's life. You know, we want to avoid having to take a side. We want to avoid there even being sides. Can there not be any sides? Can't we all just get along? And you know what happens with that? There's two things that happen with that. The desire to not be any sides. Two things happen. One is this tendency towards monism or mayavad, that let it all be one. So we want to escape from the material world and having to deal with different things. Why can't we all just get along? And then people don't, and we can't deal with that, and it's very difficult. It's a challenge, without a doubt. Thus Bhagavad Gita spoken. Thus the situation. Whether it's, epic, high fantasy, Devas versus Asuras, fate of the world type stuff, or whether it's just an argument within your family, over where we're going to go for Christmas this year. You and your wife can't agree on which family you're going to spend Christmas with, or you go to the family, Thanksgiving dinner and there's a feud, whatever it might be, whether it's at work and the two different departments are feuding, or there's a difference, between the people on your team about something that the boss did. It's everywhere. It's unavoidable. It is an intrinsic artifact of having variety. As soon as you have variety and variegatedness, you're going to have parties. You're going to have party spirit. I mentioned this before. There's an unavoidable conflict between Vatsalya Ras and Madhurya Ras. Mother Yashoda wants Kṛṣṇa to stay in his bed at night and get a good night's sleep. The gopis want Kṛṣṇa to come out at night and play. So there's going to be conflict and difference. And how will these differences be resolved? Well, that's a good question. But the first thing that we have to get ourselves over is accepting that they exist and that there's nothing wrong with that. The idea that, there can't be different sides and different parties. There's something wrong with that. That's the first thing that Arjuna has to deal with. He has to deal with that, there are sides here, Arjuna, and you got to grow up and acknowledge that and take responsibility for something here. It's an immature response to be like, oh, I just want everything to be okay. When you have children, you do bring them up and you try to create this world for them where they are not exposed to that difference. And that is actually a valid stage of development. You don't want your children to grow up in an environment where they experience their parents fighting all the time, for example, and that they have to take the side of one of the parents. That can be very traumatic for a child. So you create an environment and an ambient where the parents are united and there's an experience of harmony for the child. At the same time, if you just bring your child up in this environment where they think it's all rainbows and unicorns and harmony, as soon as they hit the real world, they're very ill prepared for dealing with the reality of difference, of divergence. They're very immature. So you need to prepare them for that, because that's the reality of the world. And to make a modern kind of comparison, in Australia, they've started talking about this thing called divergent thought. Like people who have divergent thoughts are dangerous. It's like I think it might even be a law, divergent thought law or something. The police have started talking about it and using it as a term, divergent thought. People who think things that are different are dangerous. Okay. That's appealing to a very immature level of mental development that it should all be one. And in spiritual life, this manifests as the tendency towards monism. Like, let it all be one, we should all be the same. But no, difference is eternal. In the introduction to the Bhagavad Gita, Srila Prabhupada says one may be a devotee of the Lord in these 5 different states: active, passive, as a friend, as a parent, as a lover. So these are eternal. Differences are eternal. There are feuds in the spiritual world. There are differences there too. So the first thing is that getting over the tendency to not want them to exist. And so spiritually, that manifests as monism or mayavad. Materially, it manifests itself as communism. Make everyone the same. Like the divergent thought kind of laws and that dialogue. In New Zealand, it manifested as this kind of like everybody on the same team, the team of 5 million. It's like, yeah, there are things that we have in common, but there are also differences that we have, and we need to have a societal structure that can accommodate those. On my last class, Will Skelly said, it sounds like neo-Nazi propaganda. I don't know if you understand actually, maybe it's the use of the word Aryan, which they co-opted for their program. But people today they're not very well versed in actual material history. The National Socialist German Workers' Party, the NSDAP, it's a type of socialism. So it's about national unity. It's about everybody being on the same team. And the people who are not on our team, we're going to reject them. And that's pretty much what happened in New Zealand with the team of 5 million. And if you weren't on that team, you didn't notice it. But dude, if you didn't do what they were telling everyone to do, boy, it was pretty brutal, the exclusion. And it goes on today. That hasn't disappeared. Now, the issue with that is that there does have to be discrimination in the material and in the spiritual world. You can't do away with it. You have to teach your children to discriminate. Don't put your hand on the stove or in the fire. There's a difference between hot water and cold water. This valid discrimination has to be there. These are categories called Sañjaya. So there are sides, and Arjuna finds himself on the battlefield with two sides there. But which side do you choose? Because as an adult, you have to make decisions about sides. You don't want there to be sides. Arjuna's saintly. He wants everyone to get along. Yeah, we do. And we have to acknowledge that these things are a natural and inevitable artifact of reality. And so then you have to make a decision. Are you going to be like, well, to be spiritual means to take no side at all? Arjuna tries that move. And Kṛṣṇa just tells him no. That's actually not spiritual maturity. Crazy, right? Wow. Why is Arjuna taking a side in the battle and fighting? It's material. It's mundane. He's a neo-Nazi. He's discriminating. Not only that, but here's Arjuna telling him that what you're trying to do is not Aryan. You must be an Aryan. Dude, it just sounds straight Nazi, right? Talking about Aryans, taking sides, fighting. I'm sorry, but that's Bhagavad Gita. And if you think that sounds like neo-Nazi propaganda, well, whatever. Don't take a side. Join the side of everyone together. There are no sides. Anyone who says that there are sides, well, that's divisive. But what that is that's the propaganda of monism and Mayavad. There are no sides. Yes, there are sides. There are always sides. There are sides to everything. Trying to deny that there are no sides, well, that's monism, communism, National Socialism. The attempt to annihilate any sides and have just one party, a one-party state. That's communism. National Socialism is a form of socialism or communism. The team of 5 million. It's a one-party state. There has to be a multi-party society and a multi-party state. One can be a devotee of the Lord in an active state, a passive state, as a friend, as a parent, as a conjugal lover. These are the 5 rasas that Prabhupada explains at the beginning of Bhagavad Gita in the introduction. There is a multi-party reality, eternally. Reality is multi-party, and there are conflicts between them. That's just the way that is. In the material world, Kṛṣṇa explains to Arjuna to help him to see his way through this. Wow, Arjuna, you're on a battlefield and there are 2 sides here. It's reality. Can't get away from it. You can't walk away from this. You can't wish that it were another way, why can't we all get along or go to a cave in the Himalayas or into the forest? Kṛṣṇa just says to him, no, Arjuna. Sorry, grow up. Reality is multi-party. But now what do you do? How do you make decisions? How do you make choices about which side you put your energy into, or what are you going to do? And part of that is the 16th chapter explaining the devas and the asuras to help Arjuna to locate himself and to understand that not all sides are equal in the material world. In the material world, there is actually a side aligned with God. And like a real basic way of understanding that is one side says, we acknowledge that God exists and we are following God's laws. And the other side says, God doesn't exist. Or look, people might, you're allowed to think that or whatever, but you can't actually act on that basis. Well, that's very clearly atheism and theism. Now, amongst the theists, those who say that God exists, there are those who are actually following authorized scriptures and those who are just making stuff up and using that as their, yeah, God exists, but... And so you can actually discriminate among these different sides. There are actually valid categories for discrimination. And Srila Prabhupada doesn't shy away from this at all. It's a large part of his presentation. And it's actually Bhagavad Gita. That's what it exists for. It's a book. It's here. It's in front of us. It exists to guide us through life, to give us guidance in understanding that, first of all, a multi-polarity, multi-party reality exists eternally, both in the material world and the spiritual world. In the spiritual world, they're all purely spiritual. In the material world where we find ourselves, the temporal world, some of the parties in this world are non-spiritual and some are spiritual. And what the Battle of Kurukshetra boils down to is one of those parties on the battlefield is Daivik and one of them is Asuric. And Kṛṣṇa helps Arjuna to see his way through that. Like, Arjuna, you're on a side and you must fight. There's no way of getting around that. You might not like it. You might want it to all be one. You might want there to not be any sides. You might want to not have to fight. But you are Arjuna in the first chapter, just refusing to grow up and deal with reality. You want to add anything to that? Okay. I've got my wife here to the side, patiently waiting and listening. Sañjaya uvāca, evam ukto hṛṣīkeśo, Guḍākeśena Bharata, senayor ubhayor madhye, sthāpayitvā rathottamam. Sañjaya said, O descendant of Bharata, having thus been addressed by Arjuna, Lord Kṛṣṇa drew up the fine chariot in the midst of the armies of both parties. It says here, Michael McNeish is watching. Bring them on video. Oh, let's see if Mike wants to come on. Click on that button. If you want to come on, Mike, I guess this will pop something up for you. He might be in his DAX, watching from bed or something. So yeah, the next couple of days I'm going to be doing these lives from the road. We're in Wairuru right now, and at the tiny home. And we'll be driving through Taupo and up to Auckland. I'll see if I can get Brajadam on. Today's Saturday. Tomorrow is with Muchakunda. I might be able to get Brajadam and Muchakunda on tomorrow. Param Vijayate Sri Kṛṣṇa Sankirtanam. Total world victory of Hare Krishna.